So what you get in your kit to start off with is your catch can, your mounting bracket and hardware, and if you opted for the remote drain kit, you'll get two of these little bags. Just your remote drain and some clamps, and you'll also get this. The tools you'll need for the beginning portion of this is 7/16 wrench and a 7/16 socket. Start by taking a knife and opening the bag and removing the mounting hardware. Next, what you want to do is undo these here and just twist them in lightly to start off with. Just pop these up and slide this in. At this point, you'll want to take very good note of where this long section of the mounting bracket is. Looking at the back, on the left hand side, the long section should be here. Next, you'll repeat the same procedure. Now the bracket doesn't have to be exactly lined up, but try and get it level. Then you'll take your 7/16 wrench and you'll secure the wrench on the lock washer, or on the, lock nut. Then you'll tighten it down until it's snug, but don't over torque it, otherwise you'll damage the finish on your mounting bracket and can. You may be concerned that the screws are a little short, but don't worry, once it's grabbed into the nylock, it'll hold it just fine. If you opted for the can with the remote drain kit, I'm not exactly sure how Saikou Michi will ship it, but you may need to replace the original sealed valves here with the barbed nipples. And if you need to do that, just remove it, clean away the putty or the RTV sealant, and either use another batch of RTV or some hydraulic thread sealant and just seal these in and tighten them in using a 9/16. But if you optioned for the can with the remote valves in it, they should already be installed. Once you've got the mounting bracket installed on the can, what you need to do is get your car and put it up on some jack stands or some other method of securing and lifting it up. And don't forget that if you're lifting it up, to block the rear wheels and put your emergency brake on. The next thing you're going to need to do is with your hoses. You need 1/2-inch line and 3/8 line. 3/8 line, you only need one section that's 30 inches long, so cut that, or if you got the hose kit, it will be pre-cut because there's only one of those lines. Then you need 2 sections of hoses that are 48 inches long, or 4 feet. And And then you need another section of 1/2 inch line that is 30 inches long. Because of the way the catch can has to be installed, it is virtually impossible to install it from the top of the engine just because of the size of the catch can. So what you first need to do is actually install your hoses onto the catch can, and you're going to feed them up through the bottom of the chassis, and I'll show you how that's done. So go ahead and apply the appropriate hose section to the correct nipple. When you're staring at the front of the can, you'll notice it has got the Saikou Michi logo on the front here. You'll have one angled nipple pointing out what appears to be the front of the can. That's 1/2 inch. You'll have another pointing directly out the top of the can. That's also 1/2 inch. These two are the ones that you want to put the 48-inch sections of hose onto. Secure them down using your preferred clamping method, or if you got the hose kit, the included worm gear clamps. The next section of hose that you're wanting to apply is the 30-inch sections of the 3/8 and the 1/2 inch here. Once those are installed, we're going to go underneath the car, and I'll show you where everything goes from that point on. Now this next step isn't specifically required for the catch can installation, and some people may not be able to do it, and some people may be able to. But if you've got the means to do it, then by all means you should be doing it. The one side of the canister never receives pressure because it's for the crankcase vent side. The other side of the can, however, unless you relocate your PCV valve, which some people may opt to do and some people may not, and it's not required to do that, the can itself will see pressure. So in this instance, if you have the remote drain kit, that's when you'd like to install the one side. The hose that comes in the box is one solid piece. Cut it to approximately half the length of the solid tube, and you'll get the two ends. This is more than enough for installing into the Genesis Coupe. Make sure that this valve here is firmly closed. Connect all of the connectors using the supplied hose clamps, and then go ahead and apply your 30-inch and 48-inch, or two 38-inch lines onto this side of the can. Also, you'd like to secure those with hose clamps as well. For this end, because it's not connected to anything, I used a 1/2 inch bolt and then secured that with a hose clamp. Point this away from you just in case the air comes out of the tank, or this lets go and shoots the bolt somewhere. Then take your air compressor line and hose clamp onto the 3/8 side of the can, so the port at the top. Set your regulator valve on your air compressor to roughly 10 to 15% above your maximum boost that you'll think you'll see. In this case, I'm doing a complete pressure test, and I'm going to be testing it at 37 pounds. Gently increase the pressure and then find out wherever you're leaking from. In this instance, I have a leak right here. The leak's not substantial enough to prevent the rest of the can from not leaking. But it is limiting how much pressure the line is seeing. You'll be able to tell if this side is pressurized by giving the hose a slight squeeze. If it automatically rebounds, then it's pressurized. If you want to be absolutely sure about how much pressure you're putting in, you can always put a pressure gauge on this side of the hose to monitor, and then you'll know exactly how much. Since I've already tested this can up to 40 pounds without it leaking, I was just showing you this step to make sure, so people who are really concerned about whether or not the can's going to leak or burst will know that even the valve that is included doesn't leak. And you can see here that the hose is squishy, but it rebounds instantly, so there's definitely air pressure in there. And the leak has subsided at my nozzle, and you can hear no more leak. So again, if you have the ability to do this test, just to make sure that you're not having any leaks later on, you can firmly say at the end of the install that if you are leaking boost somewhere in reference to your engine's boost gauge, that there's only the 2 clamps on the top side of the engine that you need to worry about. The clamps of the rest of the engine the rest of the catch can system aren't the ones that are going to be leaking on you, which is good because it saves you a trip underneath your vehicle while you're trying to troubleshoot where your leak might be. I should probably also note, use extreme caution when disconnecting the charged catch can from the source of the pressure, because if you set your regulator to 40 pounds and then just simply disconnect the hose and let it go, it's not going to be very good for you. So gently release the band clamp and you'll hear the pressure dissipate. The can's volume doesn't allow for a whole lot of pressure to be left inside the can, but it is enough that it could give you quite a shock or surprise if you just let it go quickly. The thing we'll be covering is removing the hoses off of the engine. You'll notice here that on the PCV valve and the intake manifold intake that there's 2 spring clamps. Take any kind of snub nose wrench that you've got and simply place like that, squeeze, and then slide it back onto the body of the hose. Then you can release it and it should be free. I've already gone ahead and done that, so we'll remove this out of the way. If you're at this stage and your vehicle has about 20,000 kilometers on it, I'd suggest taking the time and the $12 that it costs and changing your PCV valve. Your PCV valve from Hyundai lasts about 20,000 kilometers. I've gone through 3 of them in a very short period of time. Now this next part is going to be a little bit different depending on whether or not you have a stock intake system or if you have an aftermarket intake system. I have an aftermarket intake system, but you'll find a hose clamp here, which should be a spring clip. Use the same method as before to remove it. And on your intake, in my particular case I have an AM intake, and you will have been familiar with replacing this before if you've got an aftermarket intake. But if you have a factory intake, then you should find another hose on the piece that looks like this, and you'll undo this clamp here and just pop the hose out. Once you've got those 2 pieces out, we'll continue by going under the car and continuing with the installation. Now once under your vehicle, if you're stupid like me and trying to film with a tripod while you're under it, you won't have very much room to work in. You'll notice that there is you might see it, a silver-like screw right there. You'll have a black one. The black one will have a big washer on it. When you take this one out, you need to cut that washer off. Try and leave the spring clip. Alternatively, you can remove the spring clip and leave the big washer on. You'll find that one located right over here. Where have you got? See, right there. There's the little rubber gasket there and a little bar that comes down from your AC line. And these are the 2 fittings that we're using to hold everything in together. Those come out with a 10mm wrench. You can either use a wrench like this and take some time and undo them, or you can use a socket. Once you get them out, nothing's going to fall on your head. That one hose will become slightly loose. It might take some finessing to get the one bolt back in. before you get under your car and take those bolts out, it's a good idea to position your catch can in an area where you can reach it. It might take multiple trips underneath between going above and below your car to install this, as you've got the 4 hose lines that you need to plumb up to the top beforehand. An alternative method to doing this is actually feed the hoses in from above, so they're already in their position, and then attach them while you're underneath your vehicle. But I've got limited room to work in, so I didn't opt to do that. So if you got your hoses, you're going to feed them up behind your steering rack, or I should say in front of your steering rack, because I'm below the car. And you'll notice that they're the 2 48-inch ones. You want to put or position above the bell housing of the transmission. If it's winter and you're doing this outside, might I recommend choosing somebody that you don't really like to do this portion for you and have them hand you the hoses from above. Or hand them the hoses, I should say. I'll get the hoses fed up, and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so I'm back under the car. Got the hoses all tucked up there. Now we're going to go about securing the catch can to the vehicle. So this is one of the things I was trying to show you earlier, but my lighting wasn't all that good. Once the hoses are roughly in their correct position, you can actually plug them onto the vehicle's receivers and get the hoses would basically act as a means of securing the can from dropping down on you while you're under here. But to be perfectly honest, they're still kind of a pain in the ass to work around at this point. So just do what you can and you'll figure most of it out. Sorry for the light issue here, but get the can, the small hole. Now, if you've got the long section here, the long gouge here, you installed your bracket wrong. If you got the small 1/4-inch hole, then you're in the right spot. Take your silver one. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that this is the color that it's going to be, but on mine it's silver. And wiggle it around, get it back in. Line it up with the body hole. And get your 10mm wrench. And try to tighten it up. See if it pulls it in. Don't tighten it up all the way, you still want a little bit of flex. And that rubber grommet doesn't give you a whole shitload. And once you got your black one configured as such, you have two real options. You can fight with this a little bit and it'll work. Or you can go out and buy a longer one, but I'm just reusing the one I've got. This, however, is quite possibly the hardest of them all. It is a real bitch to get this one in. Just FYI. Because my lamp is actually blocking the spot where it has to go through. Or where you have to put your arm through. Reach behind, you'll find the groove, and then arrange the bracket above, or where that hole is. And then you'll have to find the hole in the body panel and tighten it in. There. Grab your 10mm wrench. Back in. And do it up. Once you got both of them in, go ahead and tighten it all up nice and snug. You might notice a couple of scratches on my catch can. That's because this catch can's been in and out of here so many times in the past couple of months that, and it's a prototype, it's been a little bit abused. And like I said, you can use a wrench, like a ratchet wrench, the socket, but because of how tight everything is in here, target the camera a bit better. Because of how tight everything is in here, you might not find it all that forgiving. This is an important time because you'll notice, some people might think, oh, it's really close here. This part of your steering bar actually doesn't move. Your steering rack is independent of this bar here, so the only time that this bar will ever move is if you get in such an accident that it crushes everything forward or backward, and in which case you're not really giving a shit about your catch can. So okay, so for what I did for the remote valves is I hooked the hoses up here, ran them down, and then put the two valves right here. Now this isn't going to work for everybody because different configurations and whatnot, but it should work for just about everybody. The only thing you're going to have to do is choose one of the valves and then swap the location between the drain and the nipple on the end, and that way you can put the two valves far enough apart on the same bolt, on the same stud here, and still open and close them. This location puts the valves just behind the wheel, as you can see here. It's just behind the wheel, so you can reach just, if you go to where, to here, you reach underneath, you'll be able to reach the valves really easy. And you might not want this spot. Maybe you want further down the chassis, maybe you want them closer to the engine bay, who knows. Do whatever you think is best. This is just a suggestion. Obviously, do your thing on your car, whichever way you like it to be. Using this method, however, I've used the least amount of hose. I actually still have an entire half section of hose. So if anything ever happened to this, then it's perfectly fine, like a rock or whatever. The other thing is the only part that it leans against is the frame.
and the subframe for the engine, so it's never going to wear through, it's never going to vibrate or whatever. Yeah, and that's basically it. For this stud here, this is a factory stud. It should be on just about every coupe, because I don't know what it's exactly there for, but maybe alignment during welding or whatever, I don't know. But it's an M8 bolt, just a regular Genesis Coupe chassis nut that you throw on there. And you can buy those for like a pack of 10 for 50 cents at a dealership or whatever. I don't have the part number offhand, but otherwise you can just try different spare nuts and stuff around your house. Maybe you got one laying around, but there you go. On to the next part.
Once you've got everything tightened up down there and the can is firmly mounted, you can come back up top to the top of your car and run your hoses up. Certain things to look for when you're running your hoses up is to make sure that the hoses aren't touching anything sharp. That's pretty much it, is sharp objects. Aside from touching the actual exhaust itself, there's nothing really on the car that can cause any rubber damage due to the rating that the hoses are. If you've opted to not buy the hoses directly from Saikou Michi, and you're using some other kind of hose, obviously take into consideration for the restrictions of those particular hoses. I'm not going to cover exactly how to run the hoses, because with different vehicle configurations and the fact that this can was designed in mind for 2013 Genesis Coupes, and as well as the 2010 design, and for automatic and manual transmissions, there isn't a set in stone kind of guideline for how the hoses should be run. Now, if you have a particular idea on how you think the hoses should be run, and the simplest method is get a piece of string or an extension cord and go from your particular location. For example, the exhaust side, or the intake side, I guess you could say, of the crankcase vent. Where exactly you want those hoses run is really up to you. And if you have a top mount turbo, then routing them around the front may not be the best thing in mind for you. Running it across and strapping it to the front side of the block to make sure that those rubber hoses don't get anywhere close to the turbo temperatures or interfere with your turbo setup, that's what you would do. And obviously you'd make measurements using a string or an extension cord on the rough estimate, and you can even contact Saikou Michi and tell them, I don't need 48 inches of hose, I need 58 or 60 inches of hose, depending on whatever your configuration that you've come up with. And they will price in and supply as necessary. So that's another benefit of going with these guys. In this particular configuration, I don't have a top mount turbo. I have plenty of heat shields that are going to protect my coupe. So those hoses are running down along above the heat shield, where they'll stay warm in the wintertime. Down around the back side of the engine, and then they're going directly down right here for mounted directly to the can. So obviously make sure that you're not pinching the hoses anywhere, getting it stuck between an electrical harness or connector, and it's just going to rub away and eat a hole through it. And it's not super critically important on this side of the engine, because again, it doesn't see any pressure. But on this side, you definitely want to make sure that nothing's going to rub and drill a hole through there. The other thing is these hose clamps, make sure they're on real nice and tight, because if you're going to get a vacuum or a boost leak, this is where it's going to come from. That's it. That's it. The catch can installed. So hope you guys didn't find this all that difficult. You're probably cursing and swearing at me right now due to the particular location. But it's the location that I found made the most sense for everybody involved. And obviously, if you don't like where I've chosen to mount the can, it is still a universal can, and it does have different mounting brackets on the back. And you can always fabricate your own particular mounting bracket, and obviously share it up on the forum and let everybody know where you came up with it if this particular situation doesn't work for you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys didn't have too much difficulty with this.